Hi, this video is for Module 8 over price controls. So here we're going to talk about price ceilings and price floors. And if we have time, we'll also talk about quantity controls. All right, so first of all, price ceiling is the maximum legal price that can be charged for a product. So just like the ceiling in a room, you can't go any higher than the ceiling, but you have all this room below the ceiling to actually work. So the best example of price ceilings is an apartment. Okay, so we're talking about apartments in large cities. We're talking about New York City, we're talking about Chicago, Seattle, San Francisco, all these cities where most people actually live in apartments. And in these cases, just like everything else, supply and demand determines the equilibrium price. So in our little example, we're going to say that the equilibrium rent for a crappy studio apartment is $1,200 a month rent. So if you don't know what a studio apartment is an apartment that doesn't even have a bedroom. The only other door other than the front door is for the bathroom. And sometimes it doesn't even have a door, it's just like a curtain. My sister-in-law used to live in a studio apartment in Washington, D.C., and I think it's about the size, her entire apartment was about the size of my classroom, just to give you an idea. So, studio apartments, $1,200 a month rent. People look at that and say, that's not fair, people can't afford that, you need to do something about it, and they complain to the government. So the government says, okay, we're going to set a price ceiling. So where are they going to set the ceiling? Below equilibrium. We already said equilibrium is too high. So in the case of the ceiling, we are putting the ceiling below equilibrium to try and make it quote-unquote fair for consumers, right? So again, like I said, is that a ceiling is the maximum legal price. So like the ceiling in a room, you can't go any higher than the ceiling, so you can't reach equilibrium, for example, but you have all this room below equilibrium to move. So now what happens is that you have this ceiling set. Now, any price set below equilibrium, what do we know about that price set below equilibrium? What's the problem with any price below equilibrium? That's right, it creates a permanent shortage. And in this case, it's going to be a shortage of apartments. So now we have people out there that want an apartment that can't get an apartment. So this creates problems as well. Okay, so the example, like I said, is rent control. So controversies of this is that not only does it create a shortage, but also you waste time and money and resources being able to find an apartment. I'll give you an example. Have you ever seen the movie When Harry Met Sally? It's an older movie, it's from the 80s, it's got Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan in it, and basically it's a romantic comedy, and the premise of the movie is, can men and women be friends? Now, the part of the movie that I'm referencing is where Billy Crystal's character gets a divorce. And he goes telling Meg Ryan's character that, everybody keeps telling me, well, at least you got the apartment in the divorce. They live in New York City. So, they keep saying, at least you got the apartment in the divorce. And Billy Crystal's character makes the joke that he says, I don't see what the big deal is about trying to find an apartment in the city. All you have to do is look through the obit section, the obituary section of the newspaper. Says, to make it easier, they should combine the obit section and the real estate section. Mr. Smith died of natural causes, leaving behind 5 grandchildren and a wonderful apartment on the Upper West Side that has 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. All right, so obviously that gets the point of, the idea that people spend a lot of time and effort trying to find an apartment in the city. So that wastes resources. The other part of the problem is that the landlord has absolutely no incentive to increase the quality of the apartment. So they're not going to make it any better than what it is because they're not going to get any more money off from it. So it's just a waste. So as a result, landlords has no incentives to make it any better. You're going to have resources wasted. You're going to have shortages. So it doesn't work out that way. I do have a video that I did show in class that's called Rent Control down here. I'm not going to play it in this video, but I will post it below this video on Canvas. So if you would like to watch that video on rent control, it is good because it's from a few years ago, San Francisco, in particular, California had rent control in the entire state of California. And this particular video was basically trying to look at the arguments for and against rent control. So they actually interview some tenants and people that were arguing for keeping rent control, and it also interviews landlords as far as their opinions. The problem with rent control is trying to get updated information about it is that the laws are usually on the books for so long, and then they come up for renewal, and that's when you have the controversy spike up again, because people don't really talk about it in the interim when it's enacted and there's nothing they can do about it. So I will post that video if you'd like to watch it. All right, the opposite of price ceilings are price floors. So price floors are the lowest legal price that can be charged for a product. So just like the floor in a room, you can't go any lower than the floor. The best example of price floor is minimum wage and wages. In this case, it's kind of confusing for some people is because the supplier in this case is actually the employee. Okay, so think about it this way. You offering your work. So if we're talking about, for example, babysitting, okay, you are the employee. You are offering your babysitting services, and you are willing to babysit more often when the price is increased. However, the demanders, if you will, is the employer, the person that's hiring you, because they are more willing to hire more people as the price goes down. Or, for example, in babysitting cases, get you to babysit more often if the price decreases per hour. Okay, so that's explaining the supply and demand curve as far as how we figure out the wages. So when we figure out what the price of workers should be, it's again by equilibrium, and it's something like $5 an hour. Again, people look at that and say, $5 an hour, that's ridiculous, that's too low, people can't live off from that. And so as a result, they get the government to set a price floor. So the price floor, as you might imagine, is minimum wage, is currently $7.25 an hour. So $7.25 an hour, you can't go any lower than $7.25, but you have all this room above $7.25 to be able to work. So you can't actually get to equilibrium, but you have all this room up here to be able to move. Like I said, it's just like the floor in a room. You can't go any lower than the floor. So the problem, however, is that if the price is above equilibrium, what's the problem with any prices above equilibrium? It's going to create a permanent surplus. In this case, it's a surplus of workers. We have too many people out there that want a job that can't get a job because the price is not at equilibrium. So that's one of the big problems is that they are going to have unemployed people. Okay, they're going to have people that aren't able to get a job. So as I said, this is an example is minimum wage. Another example could be for crops. Farmers oftentimes get paid a price floor to try and prop it up because equilibrium ends up being too low. Some people think that's good, some people think it's bad, but there's controversy over this. First of all, obviously it creates a surplus. But secondly, there are times where it will, for example, if you have this problem and you have this price floor, what will happen is increase wages for all of the business owners. So if the labor costs increase, that's a factor of production, that's an input. That's going to cause a left shift in supply for whatever product they're producing. So as a result, it's going to increase the price of everything that they're making. Okay, so that's a problem. Other problem is that there are some people that would rather work for $5 an hour, as well as there are some employers that would rather hire somebody at $5 an hour. I'm sorry, but you don't need a college degree to be able to flip hamburgers. So as a result, they have overqualified employees working at these jobs at $7.25, when employers and employees would, there are some that would still rather work at $5 an hour. So sometimes that actually does happen. And how that happens, you get paid under the table, right? So maybe you have somebody that's willing to work for $5 an hour. Legally, you can't. So you have employers that will say, hey, you know what, I'll slip you some cash here, and it'll be good for you, good for me, because, you know, you don't have to pay taxes on it because I'm not reporting it. Hey. But it causes problems because obviously it creates this black market here. The other problem is that, and you got to keep in mind what we talked about before with the idea of surpluses, is that as we move further and further away from equilibrium, what happens to our surplus? It's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Some people have actually suggested moving the price floor, or the minimum wage, up to $15 an hour, including some prominent politicians and political presidential candidates. So here's the problem with $15 an hour. And by the way, the city of Seattle does have a $15 an hour minimum wage right now. The problem with that is that you're going to have more and more unemployed. So this map actually compares the state minimum wage. So they have a minimum wage that basically they have to be at the federal minimum wage or above. You'll notice that some of these, it says that it's less than federal. They can do that if they make up the difference. Like, for example, servers, they can offer them a wage that's less than minimum wage because they make up the difference in tips. And if they don't, if they, it's a slow night or whatever, then the employer is required by law to make up the difference themselves. But right now, Seattle has the highest minimum wage at $15 an hour, and it has almost been a year. I have heard reports that there are restaurants, particularly in the city of Seattle, that are leaving the city because they cannot afford to hire workers. So they're going places where they can hire workers at lower rates. So minimum wage, good, bad, indifferent, you decide. All right, I'm going to stop here. The next video is going to be about quantity controls, so look for that.